3 in the morning. The kind of hour that belongs to insomniacs, night shift nurses, and apparently Rowan Callister. The kind of man who owned 17 hotels and still couldn't figure out why his flagship property in Manhattan was hemorrhaging money. He'd been in the finance office since noon. 14 hours, 4 cups of coffee, 2 conference calls with investors who kept asking the same question he couldn't answer, and 0 solutions. He'd finally sent his entire accounting team home at midnight. Go sleep, come back sharp. We'll crack this tomorrow. But Rowan stayed, because the kind of man who built a hospitality empire from a single bed and breakfast in Vermont didn't go home when the numbers stopped making sense. He sat on the leather chair behind his general manager's desk on the 4th floor and closed his eyes for what he told himself was just 5 minutes. Then he heard it. Click, click, click. Fast keystrokes, rhythmic, almost irritated, coming from the revenue analysis room 3 doors down, a room that was supposed to be empty. Rowan sat up. His heart didn't exactly race, but it sharpened. He grabbed his phone and walked barefoot down the corridor. Barefoot because he'd slipped off his shoes somewhere around hour 9 and hadn't bothered to find them, and pushed open the door. The light inside was off. The room was lit only by the blue glow of a laptop screen. And at the desk, in a crisp white server's uniform that somehow still looked fresh at 3 in the morning, sat a woman. Late 20s, maybe. Hair pulled back, reading glasses she kept nudging up her nose, and fingers moving across the keyboard like she was trying to diffuse something. She didn't look up, she held up one finger. Just a sec. Rowan Callister, who had not been told to wait by an employee in approximately 11 years, stood in the doorway and blinked. She held the finger up again, more firmly this time. He stepped into the room. You're in a restricted area using a company computer at 3 in the morning, explain. Now? Almost. Her voice was calm, distracted, not dismissive, just genuinely occupied. One more thing. The screen flickered. A spreadsheet filled with red-flagged cells went through a rapid cascade of changes. Corrections, adjustments, a formula collapsing and rebuilding itself. And then, quietly, everything turned green. She exhaled, sat back. Then she swiveled the chair toward him and looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Penny Walsh had been working the dinner service at Callister Grand since 7 that evening. She was not supposed to be here. She was supposed to be home in Queens by now, probably eating leftover soup and watching something forgettable on television. But she'd seen it. She'd come up to this floor at 11:30 to return a stack of folded napkins the event coordinator had forgotten. Don't ask, it was a long story involving a miscommunication and a banquet order. And on her way back to the service elevator, she'd passed this room. The door was open, the laptop was on, and the screen was showing a revenue projection so wrong it made her physically stop walking. Not a little wrong. Catastrophically, offensively wrong. The kind of wrong where someone had either made the most embarrassing formatting error in accounting history, or something deeply intentional was happening in the numbers. Either way, Penny couldn't leave it. She'd tried. She'd actually taken 3 steps away from the door and then stood in the hallway for almost a full minute talking herself out of it. Not your department. Not your job. You serve food. You go home. He went back in. That had been 2 hours ago. Now she looked at the man in the doorway. No shoes, expensive shirt with the sleeves rolled up, hair that suggested he'd been running his hands through it for several hours, and said, simply, your Q4 revenue projections are off by about $4 million. Someone transposed 2 line items in the master file about 6 weeks ago, probably an honest mistake, but it cascaded through every report downstream. Your comp analysis, your rate strategy, your occupancy forecasting. All of it has been running on corrupted data since October. Rowan stared at her. She pointed at the screen. I fixed the master file, rebuilt the formula references, and reconciled the downstream reports. It should all pull correctly now. She paused. You're going to want to have someone verify it in the morning. Not because I did it wrong, but because you should never take the word of someone you found in a restricted area at 3 a.m. Just best practices. The silence in the room was the specific kind that happens when the universe decides to just let something land. He said slowly, You're a server. She looked down at her uniform as if she'd forgotten she was wearing it. Yes, and you just rebuilt my revenue model. Penny took off her glasses, folded them, slid them into her breast pocket. I worked the dinner shift. She stood up, smoothing her apron. I should go. The last train to Queens is at 3:40. You're not going anywhere until you explain how a server knows what a cascading formula error looks like. She tilted her head slightly. Have you ever heard of the internet? He waited. She sighed. Okay, short version. I have a thing with numbers. Always have. I can't see something wrong in a table or a set of figures without it bothering me. Physically bothering me, like a She made a vague gesture near her temple, like a hum, a frequency that won't stop until the thing is corrected. I took some finance courses online because the hum was getting distracting in my daily life. She shrugged. Apparently that's not the answer you were expecting. Rowan looked at the screen, then at her, then at the screen again. What courses? She listed them: corporate financial modeling, revenue management systems, data reconciliation for hospitality and service industries, Excel, obviously, and a SQL course I never finished because the last module was boring. He rubbed the back of his neck. And you work the dinner shift. I make excellent tips, she said, without irony. And I like talking to people. The two things are not mutually exclusive. He looked at her for a long moment, then he pointed at the chair. Sit back down. At 7 a.m. you're going to explain every change you made and why. Penny picked up her bag from beside the chair. Rowan crossed his arms. You'll have it, I promise. She looked at him steadily. People say that, I'm aware. He met her eyes. I'm saying it anyway. She appeared to weigh this. Then she set her bag back down, sat on the edge of the chair and said, You should know that I didn't cause the original error. I found it. I can show you the version history if you want. The initial transposition happened on October 9th, and I can tell you it wasn't me because I didn't even have a login to this system until 14 minutes ago, when I used the one on the sticky note on the monitor. She gestured to a pink note with handwriting on it. Your IT security is, if you don't mind me saying, a little optimistic. He looked at the sticky note, Twi3. He closed his eyes briefly. Penny stood. I'll be back at 7. She paused at the door. Get some sleep. The projections will still be wrong in the morning. Or I guess, fixed now. Either way, they'll be there. She glanced back over her shoulder. And you might want to find your shoes. She left. Rowan stood alone in the blue-lit room, staring at a spreadsheet that had somehow been repaired by a woman in a server's uniform, who had an internal hum for financial errors. He looked at the clock, 3:17 a.m. In 3 hours and 43 minutes, Penny Walsh would be back. And he still didn't know whether she was the best thing that had ever happened to his company, or a problem he didn't yet understand the shape of. She was back at 6:58, not 7. 6:58, with 2 coffees from the cart downstairs and a folded printout of every change she'd made to the master file, with notes in the margins. Rowan was already there. Same shirt, though he'd found his shoes. He looked at the printout she handed him and then at her. You annotated it. She sat down across from him. You said you wanted an explanation. I thought a paper trail would be more efficient than a verbal walkthrough. He looked at the annotations. Tight, precise handwriting. Color-coded by error category. He set it down. Who are you? Penny Walsh. I work the dinner shift Tuesday through Saturday. I'm originally from Ohio. I moved here 4 years ago professionally. She folded her hands. I was a junior financial analyst at a hotel group in Chicago for about 2 years. She said it evenly, but something in her expression went slightly careful, the way people look when they're choosing what to include. It didn't work out. I came here, I needed work, and the dinner shift at Callister Grand had good hours and better tips than I expected. She met his gaze. I know how that sounds. Rowan was quiet for a moment. He slid the annotated printout back across the desk toward her. Walk me through the October 9th transaction. She walked him through it. 15 minutes, no hesitation, no hedging. She pointed to figures the way someone points to a cracked sidewalk they've been meaning to report. Matter of fact, almost impatient with the situation for existing. When she finished, Rowan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Then he said, Do you know who Gerald Marsh is? The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into water. Penny's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes went very still. He's your VP of Revenue Strategy, she said. I know who he is, and what do you know about the October 9th transaction? She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Enough to tell me it wasn't accidental. Rowan looked at her directly. Explain. The transposition involved 2 specific accounts. She tapped the printout. This one, here, this is the corporate event revenue line, and this one is the third-party commission account for events brokered through Marsh & Associates. She paused. Gerald Marsh's brother-in-law runs Marsh & Associates. The transposition made it look like event revenues were about 40% lower than they actually were, which in the commission payouts to Marsh & Associates look proportionally larger. A rounding error. Plausible. Except it happened in every quarter since Gerald Marsh joined this company. The silence that followed had a different weight than the one at 3 a.m. Rowan said, How long have you known this? I noticed a pattern 2 months ago. I've been, she hesitated, watching. Verifying, she looked at him steadily. I didn't know who to tell. I'm a server. Nobody was going to take that seriously. He stared at her. So you fixed the master file at 3 in the morning. I fixed the master file, she said, because I cannot physically leave a wrong number alone. She touched her temple briefly. The hum. Made a backup copy of the original corrupted files, the version history, and 3 months of commission records. In case. She reached into her bag and put a USB drive on the desk. Rowan looked at it, then at her, then at the USB drive again. The morning arrived in the form of his assistant, Cora, who walked in at server's uniform and did a full stop in the doorway. "Mr. Callister, you're 8 o'clock with the—" "Cancel it," he said. Cora blinked. "All of it?" "All of it." Cora looked at Penny. Penny looked at the ceiling. Cora left. By 10 a.m., the hotel was filling up with the particular organized chaos of a Tuesday checkout morning. Penny had been asked to stay. She'd agreed, changed into a spare uniform she'd had in her locker because she had learned that being prepared was simply more efficient, and she was now trying very hard not to reorganize the supply closet she'd passed twice, which was laid out in a way that made no structural sense. Gerald Marsh arrived at 10:15. Silver-haired, precisely dressed, the kind of man who had a preferred table at 3 different restaurants in Midtown and called the maitre by first name. He strode into the 4th-floor corridor with the particular confidence of someone who had never, in his professional memory, been caught doing anything. He stopped when he saw Penny. She was in the corridor outside the revenue analysis room, reviewing the printed reconciliation report she'd made because Rowan had asked her to be available for questions and she'd decided the corridor was more efficient than waiting inside. Gerald looked at her. "The uniform. Are you lost?" he said. Penny looked up from the printout. "No." She looked at it again. "Actually, could I ask, you were in the office on October 9th, weren't you? Late evening?" Gerald's face did something careful. "Why do you ask?" She pointed to a line on the printout. "There's a version stamp on the master revenue file from that date, 11:22 p.m. That's after system maintenance. The only user logged in was your credentials. Where did you get that report? From the server." She tilted her head. "Should I not have?" Gerald turned and walked directly to Rowan's office without another word. Penny looked back at the printout. She had, in fact, already sent the version history to Rowan's email at 6:59 a.m. She was not particularly worried, but she did quietly note that Gerald walked faster than she'd expected for someone in Italian loafers. Filed that away. Inside Rowan's office, the conversation lasted 11 minutes. Penny knew because she was counting, not because she was trying to, but because her brain did that automatically with uncomfortable situations. It was a quirk. She'd stopped apologizing for it. At 11:11, Gerald walked out of the office. His expression was controlled, but his jaw was set in a way that meant someone had recently told him something he wanted to dispute. He stopped when he reached Penny, looked at her for a long moment. "You have no idea what you've stepped into," he said, very quietly. "Actually," she said, "I have a fairly detailed spreadsheet about it." She held up the printout. "Do you want to see?" Gerald walked away. Penny looked at the printout, thought, probably should have not said that, then thought, no, it was accurate. Let it stand. The next hour and a half was the kind of slow-building pressure that corporate environments specialize in. Murmured conversations behind closed doors, a suddenly rearranged afternoon schedule, 2 senior managers who had been perfectly pleasant to Penny at the hotel for 8 months now, finding very interesting reasons to look at the floor when she passed them. At 12:30, Gerald reappeared, this time with printed documents and an expression like someone who'd decided to stop being subtle. He walked into the main revenue office where he was sitting at a workstation verifying the final reconciled reports, and he put the papers on the desk in front of her. "I've reviewed the changes made to the master file last night," he said loudly enough that 3 people in adjacent desks looked up, "and I have questions about the authorization for those changes." Penny looked at the papers. Specifically, Gerald continued, "I want to know why an unlicensed, unauthorized employee was accessing restricted financial systems in the middle of the night. And I want to know whether this constitutes a data breach, which would require—" She found the error first. Penny kept her voice level. "I corrected it. That's in the changelog, or she caused it." Gerald looked around the room, including the audience. "This is someone with no financial credentials, no system authorization, no business being in this office, who somehow appeared at 3 in the morning and made unilateral changes to our master revenue file. Does that sound like a coincidence?" Penny's hands had stilled on the keyboard. "Because it sounds," Gerald said, "like someone with access to this system who knew exactly what errors existed and used that knowledge to—" She stood up. Her voice didn't shake. She had spent 8 months in a server's uniform being talked past and talked over and talked around, and she had learned, in that time, that shaking was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I did not cause an error in your revenue system. I corrected one." The version history shows the original change was made on October 9th at 11:22 p.m. under your login credentials. It also shows a pattern across 6 consecutive quarters that a federal auditor would find very interesting. The room had gone entirely quiet. Gerald's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a recalculation. Fast. Rowan, he said, appearing at the doorway in that way that only happened in moments that would later feel inevitable. You need to make a decision about this woman. Either she's an employee or she's a liability. You can't have it both ways. Everyone looked at Rowan. Penny looked at him too. She kept her face neutral. But underneath every carefully controlled expression she'd worn in this office for the last 9 months, something small and tired waited, hoping. Rowan was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Gerald, my office, now." He didn't look at Penny. He walked back down the corridor and Gerald followed him, and the door closed and Penny stood in the revenue office with 4 colleagues looking carefully at everything except her. She sat back down, put her hands back on the keyboard, and started typing because movement helped and the hum was still there, and she was not going to cry in the revenue office of a hotel where she served dinner 4 nights a week. She was not. She was a little bit. She found the nearest supply closet and went inside to reorganize it. Because the shelves were genuinely a disaster, and it gave her hands something to do, and nobody could see her face when she was facing the shelves. She was in the middle of reorganizing the 4th shelf, linen products on the left, cleaning supplies on the right, everything else in descending order of frequency of use, which honestly should have been obvious, when she heard footsteps stop outside the door. "Mr. Callister said, through the door, "Are you reorganizing the supply closet?" The shelves were illogical. Penny didn't turn around. "This happens to be the most efficient use of my current emotional state." A pause. Then, "Can I come in?" "It's your hotel." He came in, looked at the shelves, then at her. "I told him to leave," Rowan said. "Gerald, he's suspended pending investigation. I've already called legal." She heard him take a breath, and I should have said something sooner. In the office, before he finished his whole speech, Penny adjusted a stack of folded tablecloths. "Did you believe him?" For about 4 seconds, she turned around. He looked uncomfortable in the specific way that honest people look when they're admitting something they're not proud of. I heard him talking, and there was a moment where the logic of it seemed what? Like it could fit. He met her eyes. "Because it was easier to doubt you than to believe that someone I hired and promoted and trusted for 3 years was stealing from me." He paused, 4 seconds. "Then I looked at the version history that you emailed me at 6:59 this morning. And I remembered that you were in Ohio at 11:22 p.m. on October 9th. Penny stared. "You verified my alibi. Cora checked your employee schedule. You were covering an event in Cincinnati that weekend." His expression was straight, but something behind it was wry and rueful. "You had 37 hours of documented service records." She turned back to the shelves. "You could have said that. In the office, I know." He was quiet. "I'm sorry, Penny. Genuinely. You deserved better than 4 seconds of doubt and a closed door." She straightened the last row of linen, set a bottle of cleaning spray on the correct shelf, label facing out. Then she turned around. "The hum," she said, "is always worse after something goes wrong. Like right now it's fairly loud." She touched her temple. "It helps when things are straight." He looked at the reorganized shelves. They were, objectively, immaculate. He looked back at her. "Come with me," he said. He walked her to the 4th-floor main terrace, one of those New York hotel terraces that existed to make guests feel like they'd briefly conquered something. And they stood at the railing with the city making its Tuesday sounds below them, and Rowan said, "Tell me about Chicago." Penny was quiet for a moment. She looked at the skyline. "I was good at my job," she said. "Junior analyst, 2 years, strong reviews. My VP at the time, a man named," she paused, "it doesn't matter. He made certain decisions about the revenue structure that I didn't agree with. I flagged them internally. He told me I was misreading the data." She turned the empty coffee cup in her hands. 3 months later, the company was under SEC investigation. The VP resigned. And somehow I was the analyst who'd flagged concerns and made everyone uncomfortable, and when they downsized the department, I was in the first round. She said it without self-pity, the way someone describes weather, and said, "That's not justice." "No," she agreed, "it's not. But it happens." She looked at him. "You learn to adjust your expectations." He was quiet. "Then, is that why you didn't tell anyone about Gerald?" She turned the cup again. "I told someone once," she said, "about something that mattered, and the person I told weighed what I was saying against what was convenient for them, and chose convenient." She met his eyes. "After that I got careful about who I handed that kind of thing to." He also understood that he had done, in miniature, the exact thing she was describing. 4 seconds. Not long, but not nothing. he said. I can't undo the 4 seconds, I know. But I can give you something better than a dinner shift. He turned toward her. I want you on the revenue team. Full-time read, actual title, actual office, actual authority to say something is wrong without having to go find it yourself at 3 in the morning. Penny looked at him, then away, then back. Gerald's people are still in that department. I know, I'm rebuilding the team. He paused, starting with someone who apparently catches million-dollar errors by feel. She almost smiled. It's not exactly by feel, it's more like the hum. He nodded. She was quiet, looked at the city. The hum was for once very quiet, almost like whatever algorithm ran her internal error detection was satisfied. Or resting, or both. I'll think about it, she said. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. She set the empty cup on the railing. But I'm thinking, which I wasn't 2 hours ago, so. Progress. He laughed. Unexpected, short, real. She hadn't heard him laugh before. It was a good sound, unpracticed, like it happened before he decided whether it should. She looked at him. What? He said. She picked up the cup. I'm going back to work. I have a station audit to finish, and then I need to refile the reconciliation report in the new folder structure I set up this morning. You set up a new folder structure. The existing one was, she exhaled, it was not great, Rowan. I'm sorry, but it wasn't. He blinked. You used my name. She paused. Is that a problem? No. He looked at her with something that was a careful way than Gerald had been careful. Not calculating, just aware. I haven't had someone call me by my name in this building in about 3 years. He glanced away. Everyone says Mr. Callister. Penny picked up her printed report. Would you prefer? Rowan is fine. He almost said something else. Didn't. Put his hands in his pockets instead. Go do your station audit, she went. He stayed at the railing and watched the city for a while and did not examine too closely why the terrace felt quieter after she left. The next 72 hours moved fast. Gerald's suspension became a termination. Legal discovered 3 additional commission irregularities across 2 sister properties. The documentation Penny had compiled, the USB drive, the backup files, the version history, turned out to be thorough enough that the company's outside counsel described it as, and she heard this secondhand through Cora, the cleanest paper trail I've seen from a whistleblower situation in 15 years. Penny had not known she was a whistleblower. She'd thought she was fixing a spreadsheet. The revenue team quietly reorganized itself. 2 people who'd been aware of Gerald's practices and said nothing were reassigned. 2 people who'd been aware and had been systematically undermined, both of whom had mentioned to Penny at various dinner services that something felt off, were quietly elevated. Penny knew this because she was watching. She watched the way she always watched, from the periphery, with her glasses on, running quiet calculations. On Thursday afternoon, Rowan came to find her in the small conference room where she'd been working through the Q4 reconciliation. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and she was so focused on the screen that she didn't hear him, and he watched her for about 15 seconds, the glasses, the annotated printout, the coffee going cold at her elbow because she'd forgotten it, before saying, Penny. She looked up, jumped slightly, took off the glasses. Sorry, she gestured at the screen. I found another thing. He came in, sat across from her. What thing? A rate strategy gap in the summer comp analysis. Not fraud, just bad math. She turned the laptop toward him. Someone multiplied when they should have divided. It's been underpricing the rooftop event space by about 18% since June. He looked at the screen, then at her. Rowan said very quietly, Do you ever stop finding things? She put the glasses back on. No. She sounded almost apologetic about it. I've tried. The hum doesn't have an off switch. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the position's still open. The offer stands. She looked at the screen. He said, I'm not asking because you're useful, although you clearly are. He paused. I'm asking because you've been doing this work for 9 months without credit, without recognition, without anyone knowing you were the reason 3 reports were quietly accurate when they should have been broken. And that's, he stopped. That's not something I'm comfortable with. She looked at him over the glasses. You're still a little bit apologizing, she said. Yeah, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. I probably will be for a while. He met her eyes. Doesn't change the offer. Say yes and you have an office with a window, a title that means something, and full system access so you don't have to use a sticky note login at 3 a.m. A small sound escaped her, almost a laugh. He'd said it dry deadpan without breaking eye contact. She looked at the laptop, the Q4 file, the things she kept finding, quietly, from a server's uniform, in the margins of a job that wasn't supposed to be hers, she said. He nodded, like he'd known she'd get there, like he'd been patient about it. Good, then starting Monday, she considered, Wednesday. I have a Tuesday shift and the Hendersons are celebrating their 40th anniversary, and they specifically asked for me, and I don't abandon a 40-year anniversary dinner for anything. He blinked. That's the most specific reason I've ever heard for delaying a job's start. She started typing again. The Hendersons are lovely. Margaret Henderson cries at the dessert course every year. It would be wrong to miss it. He stood. She was already looking at the screen. He picked up her forgotten coffee cup, looked at it, and set it back closer to her hand, where she'd actually reach it this time. She didn't notice. But she reached for it 5 minutes later, and when she found it exactly where she could reach it, she paused for just a second. He was already gone. On Monday, she'd moved it. She told herself because the transition timeline made more structural sense, and not for any other reason. Penny walked into the Callister Grand at 8 a.m. in different clothes. Not a uniform. A blazer. Dark trousers. The same glasses. She was carrying a tote bag full of color-coded folders that she had prepared over the weekend because she didn't know how to start a new job without color-coded folders. It was a quirk. She'd stopped explaining it. Cora met her at the elevator with a key card and an expression that was warm in a professional way, the kind of warmth that said, "I have been rooting for this. Your office is on 4, she said. Window faces east. Penny nodded. Thank you, Cora. He picked the east-facing one specifically, Cora said, and then looked at a spot just above Penny's shoulder. I'm told the morning light is good for working. Penny looked at the key card. She took the elevator, found the office, east-facing, with a view that made Tuesday mornings feel like they might be survivable. A desk, a monitor, a pen holder with four pens in it, all the same color, because someone had given that actual thought. She sat down, turned on the monitor, pulled out her glasses. The hum, which was usually some version of present, was very quiet. She started working. At 10 a.m., Rowan knocked on the open door. She looked up, he said, "How's the east light?" She looked at the window. "Good," she said. She almost left it there, almost. Then, "I know Cora told me." He didn't look embarrassed. He looked like someone who'd made a small decision and wasn't going to pretend he hadn't. "Okay." She tilted her head. "You picked the light." He crossed his arms, leaning on the doorframe. "You spend a lot of time looking at screens with a lot of data on them. Good light matters." She looked at him for a moment. Then, she looked back at the monitor. "I found 2 more things this morning." "Of course you did." He stepped into the office. "Tell me," she told him. He sat across from her and listened, actually listened, in the way that meant asking the follow-up questions that said he'd understood what she'd said first. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What would you do about the second one?" She told him that too. He said, "Do it, and copy me." She turned back to the screen and started drafting the adjustment. He stayed in the chair reading something on his phone, and neither of them said anything for about 7 minutes. And the silence was comfortable. The right shape for a room with east light and a good monitor and 2 people who both found it easier to work than to stop working. Eventually he stood. She didn't look up. "Lunch is at 12:30, he said. "There's a place on 53rd that does a decent." He paused. "Actually, do you have preferences about utensils?" She heard the hint of something in his voice, a dry note she was starting to recognize. "Because I can call ahead." She did look up then. "The silverware at a restaurant doesn't usually bother me unless it's very bad." She paused. "Unless it's very bad," he nodded seriously. "I'll call ahead." She returned to the screen. 12:30. 12:30, he walked out. She allowed herself a small smile at the monitor, the kind that nobody sees when you're looking at a screen because the screen doesn't notice, but it happens anyway. The hum was quiet. The light was good. The numbers in front of her were beginning to tell the truth, and she was the person who'd made them do it. Some things, she thought, and the thought was small and tentative, and she was not quite ready to look at it directly yet, were worth fixing. Not because the hum demanded it, but because what came after was beginning to look like something she wanted to be inside of. She straightened the pen holder. It had shifted 2 centimeters to the left while she wasn't watching there. Now it was right.